Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 18th of October 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're joined today by live video Skype link with David Scott, Northern Exposure, and Alex Thomson, Eastern Approaches. And of course, Alex reporting from the depths of the Netherlands.
Happy EU Human Trafficking Day, Brian. That is today.
Good.
Yes.
Good. I missed that.
So here we are. Rob Wainwright, who's the British Executive Director of Europol, he has said by working together, he tweeted out, we can succeed in eradicating this heinous crime. I don't think so. He said in the quote that went with this, he said, trafficking in human beings is a global problem and a thriving criminal industry that affects the lives of millions of children, women and men around the world who are trapped in severe forms of exploitation. By working together, leveraging our concerted power and increasing the operational priority given to investigating human trafficking, the police community and civil society can succeed in eradicating this heinous crime. Well, the key point there is that, of course, it's huge quantities of money being made as a result of this, and Europol and the other agencies not getting enough money to tackle it. It's the same business model as the drugs trade, as far as I can see. Works very well for certain sections of the community, not least the financial system. But the point here, Brian, is that Rob Wainwright isn't going to do anything really to make any major impact on human trafficking. We can have these human trafficking days every year at the behest of the EU, but it isn't actually bringing the situation forward in any way.
The days are just to give the general public the feel that something's being done. It's like the major charities rattling their collection boxes that they're doing something about cancer or they're doing something about child protection, but they never actually do it. Perhaps we can remind our audience that at the moment, we, the UK column, at the UK column, are very confident that the British government cannot produce any single statistic for the number of children that disappear each year in UK. If you go to the National Crime Agency, they haven't got the figures. The child protection charities haven't got that figure. Wouldn't that figure be a good place to start to actually understand how many children are being who are disappearing each year?
That would seem reasonable.
Too difficult for Britain in 2017. So here we're seeing very interesting the mix. Why the World Bank is interested in education, Mike, I'm not too sure. But this man hops from education into the World Bank, and then the next minute he's controlling the policy for exiting the European Union.
Good stuff.
It's remarkable. Alex, we often see these young people, I've got to say that with a smile on my face, of course, young people parachuted into immensely powerful jobs by other politicians with a background in banking. Banking seems to be the key.
It is, Brian, and I thought in my silly little way that having had 8 years' experience in one of the intelligence agencies, I knew how the government and the establishment more or less worked. But it took me until I came out and started watching the UK column and reading many sources tipped by UK column viewers that I realised that the top of the pyramid is actually the banks and has nothing to do with the formal levers of government. Now, if you look up the DVM TV channel on YouTube, you'll find 3 parts so far with English subtitles of an interview with Ronald Barnard, the whistleblower, and he sets it out as beautifully as anyone has. 8,500 hedge fund managers wish to control the world. Many are Luciferians. They set up the Bank for International Settlements in Basel with the diplomatic immunity. It tells both the World Bank and the IMF, both twin institutions in Washington across the road from each other, how much money supply there will be and what the spending priorities are. And that's where the education and reframing and vaccinations and whatnot comes from. And below that are the central banks. And below that, we forget the first tier of government, Prime Minister, the sovereign even, is only at that level. So we're down 5 layers before we get to actual constitutional government in this model. That is, I'm afraid, the root of the evil. And as you said yesterday, Brian, it was the banks that set up effectively the British equivalent of Phi Beta Kappa, the fraternity for, shall we say, forward-thinking leadership material students. The British version of that became Common Purpose, and it's funded by the banks.
Thank you for a really excellent summary on that. We're obviously going to have to spend more time on the issue of banking, but it is interesting to see how it's becoming ever easier to see the banks working behind the politics that is making our lives a misery.
Well, you just mentioned military unification there, Brian. Well, we've got another country now declaring its intention to join the EU's defence initiative, PESCO, being discussed at the European Council meeting tomorrow and Friday. If you're not aware of what PESCO is, have a look at the last 2 days of UK column news, and you'll get the details of that. But this is the key driver for military unification in the EU. But we have some really good defence news, Brian, really fantastic defence news, because here we are. The F-35 has been cleared for takeoff. This is the UK's cutting-edge F-35 fighter jet. We don't really know how much each one of these costs. It seems to, the entire project seems to cost a huge amount of money, but it's very difficult to get to grips with just what each. And I suppose
we
it's a
think
moving
about
target.
$123 million per aircraft.
Yeah. Well, it has been cleared for takeoff from HMS Queen Elizabeth following successful trials. There's a picture of it taking off from the ramp in the desert, because that's where you need to test takeoffs for aircraft carriers, in the desert. That's the best place for it. As I say, this is the UK's cutting-edge F-35, and Harriet Baldwin has said successful ski ramp trials mean the F-35 is cleared to fly from the carrier as the momentum continues for this game-changing jet. This milestone comes as our pilots and planes prepare for return from the States, ready for next year's unforgettable flight trials from the deck of the nation's new flagship. Now, the key words in that quote, it's cleared to fly from the carrier, because of course this was all about takeoff trials. And it says here during the Select Committee session in Parliament yesterday that Harriet Baldwin announced that the F-35 Integrated Task Force, which includes 5 British pilots, have now successfully completed ski ramp trials. This milestone clears the aircraft for takeoff from the deck of the carrier. There's nothing in this press release which says anything about landings. As far as I know, there have been no trials about landings. We don't know when it's going to be cleared for landings. But it can at least negotiate half of its main mission, which is safe takeoffs and safe landings, Brian.
Okay, and the bit I'll add to that, Mike, is there is not a word at the moment from the Royal Navy or the Ministry of Defence about the immense problems inside the Royal Navy. We have mentioned this time and time over many years, but big problems with manning on board the ships, technicians in very, very short supply. And this morning I have been told, and we're going to follow up on this, that at the moment there is no single ship in the Royal Navy that is fully 100% operational. All of them have some issue, whether it's related to maintenance or spares or manning or other problems, as we saw with Vigilant, which had a major breakdown of morale and discipline on board. But the source who spoke to us this morning says there is not one ship that's unaffected by this.
Now, in the chat box, a comment has been made that the pilots of the F-35 must be breathless with excitement. Well, no, that's not true. They're breathless because the F-35 keeps switching off its oxygen supply and they have nothing to breathe. That's why they're breathless. Now, let's bring David Scott in at this point. David, because you sent over a video clip from a Canadian news broadcast a couple of days ago, which is calling for the return of the Avro Arrow instead of the F-35.
Yes, this was from a few years ago, but I think the movement's still live in Canada. The Avro Arrow was a plane developed by Avro in the former manufacturers of the Lancaster bomber. They've been building Lancasters in Canada during the war. They developed a considerable degree of skill, and after the war, they set up an independent company, Avro Canada, and they developed this absolutely world-beating aircraft to a spec put forward by the Royal Canadian Air Force. And it's been suggested, it was cancelled in 1959. It was manufactured, there was something like 7 planes flying. It was a huge technical success and was cancelled by the Canadian government. And it's been suggested that it could in fact be resurrected. It was cancelled in a strange way. It was kind of destroyed. The instruction was to destroy all the drawings and all the videos. It was to be completely deleted from the memory banks. But the engineers who had spent so long working on it took a lot of the drawings home, and enough of the information survived that it could actually be resurrected. Now, when you compare it with the F-35, it gets a little embarrassing. Remember, this is a 1950s technology. It's twice as fast as the F-35. It flies far higher. It's got twice the range. As a platform for shooting at things, it seems to be enormously better.
It has many similarities in terms of its treatment by government with the TSR-2, Brian.
Absolutely, and I can say because my father worked on the TSR-2 project, and I remember well the night he came home to say that the whole project had been suddenly cancelled by the British government, but exactly the same things as you're talking about, David. The whole of the production facilities were to be destroyed, the jigs were to be destroyed. It was clear that there was to be no possibility of this aircraft being resurrected. And the point we're really making is the destruction of these aircraft and the technology. We can leave aside the fact it was military, but it was our own governments that were destroying the progress being made. Why would they do that, I wonder?
David?
This is exactly the point. I mean, in losing this plane, Canada lost a leading edge ability in supersonic aircraft manufacture. And if they spent all of their taxpayers' hard-earned money, rather than buying F-35s, which don't work, but in developing industry and ability within their own country, people are saying, well, actually, it would be cheaper because the sort of economies of scale we're meant to have aren't coming from the F-35. And look at all the benefits we would get.
Yeah. I think we just better add in here, we are of course well aware that the F-35 is capable of vertical takeoff and landing. We are aware of that, so not quite comparing apples with apples. But the point is that the technology that was there many years ago simply destroyed by our own governments.